Now in our 26.61 year, more than a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are this week in amateur radio. Your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1384 with a release and air date of Saturday, September 6, 2025. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone.
Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and podcast on the internet since 1993, we are This Week in Amateur Radio. The worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1384 of This Week in Amateur Radio. A worldwide retailer and well-known distributor of amateur radio equipment in the European Union holds shipments to the United States. We take an updated look at the high-power, experimental shortwave stock trading stations in the U.S. September is National Emergency Preparedness Month and the Federal Emergency Management Agency has 12 suggestions to help. The ARRL Laboratories is helping amateurs avoid interference with U.S. Space Force PAVE-PAWS radar systems on 70 centimeters. NASA deploys a 39-foot wide radar antenna in orbit. We will tell you about it. HAMs in Rochester, New York are celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Erie Canal system. NASA is seeking volunteers to track the Artemis 2 mission to the moon and back. We will tell you how you can participate. Band plan changes for 30 meters is eyed by the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters. And if you are looking to practice some CW, straight key nights are currently on the air in Canada. We will tell you about it in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio, gets back to his Bald Yak project, and in this edition, he covers the process of getting raw data from a remote receiver. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us aboard the Wayback Machine to the late 1920s. Though radio had changed rapidly and radically during the 1920s, that change only accelerated in the early 20s. New regulations, the broadcast boom, the abandonment of Spark for CW, and new transmitter, receiver, and antenna designs were all happening simultaneously. This week's edition is entitled New Circuits. We will stop by and visit with Bill Saliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now.
Reporting from our headquarters studio in Albany, New York, and sitting in for the vacationing Don Hulick, K2ATJ, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Sandwich, Illinois, where we're enjoying this fantastic, fair weather, and I'm stuck with some hard decisions on whether to get an elephant ear or a funnel cake, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2 MOB.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in Cortlandville, New York, where my crystal ball tells me fall will be here soon, or maybe it's my thermometer telling me that, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2 FAF.
And reporting live from the warm and humid Space Coast in Florida, I am Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our news bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, home of the Ham Shack TV studio, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our New York News Bureau, where fall is just around the corner, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where, after enjoying a couple of weeks of fall-autumn, we seem to be heading back into late summer weather. It sure was nice while it lasted. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Leading off our amateur radio news this week. Many U.S. amateurs have learned from many retailers around the world how America's tariffs are affecting their ability to order imports. In France, one leading ham radio equipment supplier announced it was among those companies halting deliveries to the U.S. altogether. Founded in France in 2014, PassionRadio.com has become a leading online seller of ham radio receivers, antennas, and other equipment to customers around the world. From August 25th, however, the company suspended all shipments to the United States, noting that the French national postal operator has stopped accepting U.S.-bound parcels. The company's director, David F1JXQ, has said on the company's webpage, with constant changes in tariffs, shipping cost, and carrier processes, we cannot guarantee fair or transparent conditions for our U.S. customers any longer. Our priority is to restore a reliable and cost-effective shipping solution as soon as possible. He added that the import duties are paid by the buyer, not the seller. When the purchased good arrives in the U.S., the seller has no control over that. U.S. Parcel and other shipping services are also reviewing deliveries to the United States. UPS expects to apply an extra international processing fee to all imports from anywhere outside the U.S. starting September 8th. Imports to Europe from the U.S. remain unaffected, David said. He went on to say that our collaboration with 5 U.S.-based suppliers continues without disruption, as the European Union has not imposed any retaliatory tariffs or reciprocal 15% import duties on the products arriving from the United States. Meanwhile, hams in the U.S. have also began to feel the impact of another sweeping marketplace change. Low-cost purchases from overseas that were once not subject to such tariffs have lost that long-standing exception. Those so-called de minimis parcels are estimated to make up as much as 97% of packages imported. The elimination of this exception also affects awards or merchandise ordered through SOTA. Awards manager Barry, GM4TOE, wrote on the SOTA Reflector on August 29th. That he was unable to process any orders for low-value shipments to the United States.
Updating a story we've been keeping an eye on for you, 10-Band LLC has received permission to modify its station WI2XNX, having successfully conducted market trial evaluating the use of high-frequency spectrum for the delivery of financial market data to external trial participants, the company said. The modification will facilitate evaluating the performance of upgraded transmission infrastructure, including the development of more directional antennas and higher power transmitters aimed at improving signal fidelity and reach, and designing and testing a next-generation radio platform optimized for encoding financial data with the goal of ensuring reliable communication across a wider range of ionospheric conditions. WI2XNX is authorized up to 385 kilowatts effective radiated power in 9 HF bands at its Elburn, Illinois and Humptulis, Washington stations. The license is for experimental purpose only and does not permit commercial service or market access, the FCC did note, in applying 16 conditions to the experiment. Market trial testing is limited to up to 50 participants. RCA Telecom has added a third transmission site to WO2XPY in West Chicago. It comprises a 10-kilowatt amplifier, 3 Yagi antennas, plus a log periodic array.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
September is National Preparedness Month, and the ARRL is working to arm members with knowledge and resources to be resilient in the face of disaster. With more detail on how you can prepare, we go to League headquarters, where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this report.
Amateur radio serves as a powerful tool and national resource before and when all else fails. But being prepared goes beyond radio. Being ready to serve your community through ham radio begins with being ready yourself, said ARRL Director of Emergency Management Josh Johnson, KE5MHV. Johnston spent 17 years as a county emergency manager before coming to lead programs such as the ARRL Amateur Radio Emergency Service, Erie. Having a plan and preparing yourself will improve your chances of being resilient in the face of disaster. Erie works closely with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, who has shared a checklist of 12 ways to prepare, which you can find right now at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The FEMA recommended ways to prepare are sign up for alerts and warnings, make a plan, save for a rainy day, practice emergency drills, test family communication plans, safeguard documents, plan with neighbors, make your home safer, know evacuation routes, assemble or update supplies, get involved in your community, and document and insure property. You can find more information and resources at ready.gov/September and at awrl.org/Aries.
It is time for this month's edition from the Volunteer Monitor Program. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. This is the current activity report of the VM program. A technician operator in Texas was issued an advisory concerning 40-meter FT8 operation. Another technician operator in Texas was issued an advisory concerning 15-meter FT8 operation on 40 and 15 meters. Technicians have only CW privileges on those bands. Technician operators in Louisiana, Missouri, and New Mexico were issued advisories for operating on 20-meter FT8, a band on which technicians have no operating privileges. An operator in Virginia was issued an advisory for deliberate interference to a net on 7.248 MHz. The frequency was not in use when the net control began the roll call. Still, the operator began deliberately interfering because his net was to start sometime later, and he wanted the frequency clear. The FCC considers this operation to be deliberate interference, in violation of Section 97.101 Subpart D of the Commission's rules. All frequencies in the amateur radio service are shared, and no non-emergency net has greater rights than any other amateur operator. A commendation was issued to an operator in Texas for courtesy shown to ADX station on April 19, 2025. The operator was managing an AM net on 17 meters, but changed frequencies at the request of the DX station. Advisory notices concerning improper wide signals were issued to stations in Washington, North Carolina, and Texas. Section 97.307 Subpart A of the Commission's rules states, no amateur station transmission shall occupy more bandwidth than necessary for the information rate and emission type being transmitted, in accordance with good amateur practice. A commendation was issued to an operator in Illinois for his work with the local emergency management agency on the W9ANL repeater on 146.970 MHz, assisting in efforts to restore damaged power lines and removal of downed trees. 2 operators in New Hampshire received commendations for building a system of 2-meter and 70-centimeter nodes across mountainous terrain in New Hampshire. Before their installation, all communications had to be relayed. An operator in Virginia was issued an advisory notice for transmissions on 3.933 MHz after being asked to cease interference on top of existing communications and continuing the interference with unsolicited comments. There was one FCC meeting. The totals for monitoring for this report were 1,452 hours on HF frequencies and 2,181 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 3,633 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this report.
United Space Command headquarters is being moved to Huntsville, Alabama, known as Rocket City, USA. The move was announced in a press conference on September 2, 2025. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with all the details on the move and its implications.
Huntsville will host the 2026 ARRL National Convention as part of the Huntsville Ham Fest, but there's a bigger connection between U.S. Space Command and amateur radio. Space Command utilizes forces such as the U.S. Space Force to accomplish its command mission. The ARRL lab supports the U.S. Space Force Phased Array Warning System, PAVPAWS, early warning radar installations, which scan the skies for incoming missiles and space junk. Since 2007, the ARRL lab has been conducting this crucial analysis using Longley Rice terrain modeling to determine if an amateur fixed station repeater or EME station is eligible for a waiver to be granted by the military to run more than 50 watts of RF power on the 70 centimeter band, currently allowed with a 100-mile radius of either Cape Cod Air Force Station in Massachusetts or Beale Air Force Base in California. We want to ensure that amateurs can exercise as many operating privileges as possible while understanding the need for the Space Force to operate without interference, said ARRL Lab Manager George Spada, K1GKS. The reports provided to the Space Force advise a cone of protection in azimuth and elevation at which the amateur world would be limited to a power level and which would not interfere with the radar. Amateurs are secondary users of the 70 centimeter band, and the ARRL Lab's cooperation with the military helps ensure that we do not interfere with this vital function of our nation's security. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
As of this writing, the lab is conducting this analysis for 2 different waiver requests. It is an important part of the work we do to serve radio amateurs, said Spada.
The newly launched NASA Synthetic Aperture Radar satellite has successfully deployed a record-breaking 39-foot wide radar antenna in orbit, unfolding it like an umbrella after weeks of careful preparation. Launched on July 30th from India's Satish Dhawan Space Center, the satellite carries 2 powerful radar systems, L-band from NASA and S-band from the Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO. ISRO is capable of penetrating clouds, vegetation, snow, and tracking changes on the Earth's surface. The massive gold-plated wire mesh reflector weighs 142 pounds, was released through a carefully staged process involving joint-by-joint boom extensions and the firing of explosive bolts. It took 4 days for the structure to fully extend before motors and cables pulled it into its final drum-like shape. The antenna reflector, made of gold-plated wire mesh, has been compared to the eye of the system, and it operates, as we said, on both L and S bands. NISAR will be capturing detailed data about forest and wetland ecosystems undergoing change, about the impact of earthquakes on the Earth's crust, and the motion of glaciers and sheets of ice over time. The mission is designed to help communities around the world plan ahead for natural disasters and implement recovery from them more efficiently. Karen St. Germain, director of NASA's Earth Science Division in Washington, D.C., said the project will go a long way toward using science to assist in decision-making under these difficult circumstances, from responding to disasters to formulating agricultural policy. According to NASA, the system that operates on the L-band is particularly suited to penetrate forest canopy and clouds. The S-band system has particular sensitivity to light vegetation and moisture in snow. The unprecedented joint satellite project will collect an estimated 80 terabytes of data daily.
In response to the radio amateurs of Canada's recent edition of a new Yukon section, the ARRL Contest Advisory Committee is reviewing Canadian section multipliers for ARRL contests that use sections as multipliers. While this review is ongoing, the 2024 multiplier list will be used for the remainder of 2025. Stations located in Yukon should continue to send TER territories for the 2025 November sweepstakes, CW, SSB, and ARRL 160-meter contests. In sweepstakes, stations in the United States and Canada, including territories and possessions, exchange information with as many other U.S. and Canadian stations as possible on the 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10-meter bands. The 2025 ARRL November sweepstakes will be active the first full weekend of the month, November 1st through the 3rd for CW, and the third full weekend, November 15th through the 17th for phone. For contest information, contact contests@ARRL.org.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
The Northeast Ham Exposition, hosting the ARRL New England Division Convention, held on August 21st through the 24th, 2025, was a resounding success. With more on the details of the Northeast Ham Expedition, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, with this special report.
The weather for the Marlborough, Massachusetts event was picture perfect. The flea market was buzzing with sales, and major equipment manufacturers were back, along with other vendors inside the bustling exhibition area. According to HAMX Program Chair Skip Youngberg, K1NKR, this year's 4-day program featured 72 presenters who gave 82 talks and 4 workshops spanning over 101 hours. Topics included everything from antennas and ENCOM vans and trailers on display to on-the-air activities such as POTA, contesting, and DX. There was even a special technical talk entitled Demystifying Quantum Computing, Application of RF Control Systems. On Friday, full-length educational seminars were held, including the ever-popular Mini Contest University. 20 convention-goers went on a bus tour of W1AW, the Hiram Percy Maximum Memorial Station, and ARRL headquarters in Newington, Connecticut. The Saturday Grand Banquet featured Dr. Nathaniel Fizel, W2NAF from the University of Scranton. Fizel is the founder of HAM Radio Science Citizen Investigation, HAMSci. And dozens of youth members of New England SciTech, a nearby STEM makerspace, attended throughout the weekend and the 2 evening banquets. Having young hands in the middle of the action and running a number of presentations demonstrated the spirit of the future leaders in our hobby, said Volunteer Chair Barbara Irby, KC1KGS. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Ham Exposition kicked off on Thursday night featuring nationally known comedian Justin McKinney. The Friday evening DX contest banquet talk was presented by well-known multi-station owner Tim Duffy, Kilo 3 Lima Romeo, Chief Executive Officer of DX Engineering. On Saturday morning, popular QRP YouTube podcaster and influencer Thomas Witherspoon, Kilo 4 Sierra Whiskey Lima, gave an inspirational convention keynote address to a standing room only crowd. He shared with the audience descriptions of cutting-edge experiments conducted by ordinary radio amateurs who are helping to advance the knowledge of propagation and the Earth's ionosphere. The Northeast Ham Exposition also featured kit-building sessions led by Bob Finney, Kilo 5 Tango Echo Charlie, and other volunteers. Under supervision, beginners were invited to build easy kits at nominal cost in under an hour, ranging from Morse code oscillators to blinking name badges and nightlights. All tools were provided. The kits were developed by students from the New England SciTech. We thank New England Vice Director Phil Temples, Kilo 9 Hotel India, for the use of his story.
ARRL CEO David Minster, NA2AA, is the guest on the DX Mentor YouTube channel this week. The host of the popular show, This Week in Amateur Radio's own Bill Salyers, AJ8B, and Joe Pater, W8GEX, spoke with the minister at length about the many topics of interest. They touched on the recent introduction of the DXCC Trident plaque, which recognizes the achievements of amateur radio operators who have confirmed two-way radio contacts with 100 or more DXCC awards countries on 3 nodes. Minister also talked about the newly announced 10-band DXCC award. The importance of radio clubs and 2026 being designated as the ARRL year of the club are also the topics of discussion. Minster also answered questions about the decisions made at the recent second meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors. The trio talked about this year's Huntsville Hamfest, which held its annual convention in Alabama earlier this month. Huntsville Hamfest will host the ARRL National Convention next year, August 22 and 23, and 2026. Other topics of interest included the impact of social media on amateur radio and ARRL leadership and governance. Minster also talked about the ARRL DX Advisory Committee. You can watch the 2-hour interview on YouTube or listen to the DX Mentor podcast on your favorite platform.
The New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters is advocating for a new band plan, giving space to single sideband on 30 meters. Following the lead of the amateur band plan, In place in Australia, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters is recommending the establishment of a new 10 kHz wide subband for single sideband on 30 meters. This change would divide the CW-only band in half, giving it 20 kHz at the bottom of the band. Digital mode operators would get 20 kHz of spectrum, double their current allocation at the top of the band. Sideband's proposed 10 kHz would be found between 10.120 and 10.130 MHz. With SSB operation already legal in New Zealand, the association notes that only the approval of this revised band plan stands in the way of the change taking place. The proposal is for this to occur on a 12-month trial basis, with a review to take place in the final months.
NASA seeks volunteers to passively track the Artemis II Orion spacecraft as the crewed mission travels to the Moon and back to Earth. NASA is asking for those with the necessary capabilities to observe the Doppler shift on the Orion's S-band return link carrier signal. The monitoring is designed to archive and keep a carrier lock solely for purposes of tracking the spaceship. Volunteers will not be transmitting or uplinking signals. Orion's S-band signal is between 2,200 and 2,290 MHz. The Artemis II test flight, a launch of the agency's Space Launch System rocket, and Orion spacecraft will send NASA astronauts Reed Wiseman, KF-5 LKT, the commander, Victor Glover, KI-5 BKC, the pilot, and Christina Hammock Cook, as well as the Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen, KF-5 LKU. The launch is expected to be no later than April of 2026, and the flight will last an estimated 10 days on an approximately 10-day mission around the Moon. The mission will rely on NASA's Near Space Network and Deep Space Network for primary communications and tracking support throughout its launch, orbit, and re-entry. However, with a growing focus on commercialization, NASA wants to further understand industry's tracking capabilities. This collaboration opportunity builds upon a previous request released by NASA's Space Communication and Navigation Program during the Artemis I mission, where 10 volunteers successfully tracked the uncrewed Orion spacecraft in 2022 on its journey thousands of miles beyond the Moon and back. During the Artemis I mission, participants, ranging from international space agencies, academic institutions, commercial companies, nonprofits, and private citizens, attempted to receive Orion's signal and use their respective ground antennas to track and measure changes to the radio waves transmitted by Orion. By offering this opportunity to the broader aerospace community, we can identify available tracking capabilities outside the government, said Kevin Goggins, NASA's Deputy Associate Administrator for the Space Communications and Navigations Program at NASA's headquarters in Washington. This data will help inform our transition to a commercial-first approach, ultimately strengthening the infrastructure needed to support Artemis missions and our long-term Moon to Mars objectives. Responses are due by 5 p.m. EDT on Monday, October 27th, 2025.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX as part of Ham Radio's oldest ham radio magazine on the air, This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Bill, AJ8B. As of this Saturday, there will be 109 days until Christmas. Can you believe it? Time is flying, so we better get started. The DX phrase for the week is the ARL DXCC program. DXC stands for DX Century Club, and it is one of the most prestigious and long-standing award programs in amateur radio. It's administered by the American Radio Relay League, or the ARRL. It recognizes amateur radio operators who've confirmed two-way contacts with 100 or more distinct geographical entities around the world. Key features of the DXCC program include DXCC entities. These are not just countries, but also include certain remote islands and territories that meet specific criteria. There are currently over 340 entities on the DXCC list. Confirmation requirement. To qualify, operators must provide proof of contact, either QSL cards or electronic confirmations via LOTW or Logbook of the World. Operating modes and bands. Awards are available for different modes, such as CW, phone, and digital, and for different bands, for instance, 160 meters, 80, or 40. I also was able to earn the mobile DXCC, which is for confirming 100 QSOs from your car. There are also challenge awards for working entities across multiple bands. Honor roll and the number 1 honor roll. The honor roll is for those who have worked and confirmed all current entities except for a few, typically 5 or so. The number 1 honor roll is for those who have confirmed every current entity on the list, and that takes a long time, my friends. The expeditions. Many rare entities are only accessible via special expeditions known as D-expeditions, which are major events in the ham radio world. It is the DXCC program which provides the fire that everyone uses to spend countless hours chasing stations across the globe. It is also the catalyst that individuals and groups use to go to difficult to reach places and often risk their safety to give out QSOs. If you have any questions about the DXCC program, just contact me at thedxmentor@gmail.com for details. You can also listen to episode 2 of the DX Mentor podcast YouTube channel entitled All Things DXCC to learn more. I mentioned it last week and it continued this week and it will continue on. There is more and more DX showing up along the gray line on 80 meters and 160 meters. Now is the time to get active and to get in the habit of listening during the gray line, which is that period between dawn and dusk and dawn. Let me know if you need more information about this gray line so that you can work DX. I'll have more details on it next week. Each week, I try to focus on those entities that will be available in the next 7 days. There's so much data to sift through that I thought a focus on the next week might be helpful. Here's what you should find QRV when you tune the bands. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. So let's start with a 3 Yankee 0 Kilo update regarding plans to activate Bouvet. LA7 GIA, Ken, has paid a $400,000 deposit for the vessel that will transport the 3Y0K team to Bouvet Island next February. This weekend, the team will gather in Oslo, Norway to pack their shipping container, which is then scheduled to be shipped in 1 month. The team has organized their plan and prepared equipment to be transported onshore by helicopter using a staged approach. And you can visit the 3Y0K website for more information. This is a huge undertaking, and I can't wait for them to pull it off, which I know they will, and then I can't wait to get them in the log. It's an all-time new one. I think this is exciting information. Iraq's Communications and Media Commission has issued the call YI9WPZ, which has been authorized by the Iraqi Amateur Radio Society, to Antonio IZ5WPZ. That call sign is good through the end of November. So if you hear Yankee India 9 Whiskey Papa Zulu on the air, it's legit, and you really should try to get them in the log. Dave, G4OSY, is QRV from Bermuda as VP9/G4OSY until September 14th. Operations are taking place on sideband CW across 160 through 6 meters using 100 watts from an FT920 transceiver. The antenna setup includes a Cushcraft A4, dipoles for 160, 80, 40, and Work 79, as well as a 5-element Yagi for 6 meters. QSL requests should be directed to G4OSY. Janus SP9FIH, operating as VK2/SP9FIH from Lord Howe Island through September 13th, encountered unexpected challenges at the outset of his activities. He planned to begin operations on August 27th, but unforeseen circumstances at his location delayed the start until August 28th. The only available site for antenna installation was adjacent to a substantial aging steel mast with steel guy wires and 2 large steel dishes, which interfered with the antennas, causing detuning and degraded SWR performance. Additionally, several nearby trees further complicated the setup process. Janusz devoted much time to carefully adjusting the antennas to accommodate these constraints. More recently, he has lost the use of his ICOM IC7300, so he is now only on FT8. Again, I've mentioned this before, but between insects and bugs and walruses and seals and penguins and all the challenges these guys have, he's run into really a good operating spot that just happens to have steel all over it, so he's in a bind. So it's really an endeavor when these guys go out to these places. The Ohio Penn DX Bulletin reports that Alpha 35 Juliet Kilo, operated by MASA JK1JXZ, is now QRV from Tonga A35. The town he is in is the capital and the largest town on Tonga. So far, MASA has been heard on 17, 15, and 12 meter FT8. One mention is he will be there until September 12th. Another is that the length of his stay is unknown. He may also be trying 20 meters, QSL to his home QTH in Japan of JK1JXZ. Brandon, ZS6LZ, will undertake what he calls a 6-day, quote, micro-D expedition, end quote, across Lesotho's Malati Drakensberg Mountains starting September 17th. He will activate 10 summits above 3,000 meters, including Thebana Nyana, covering about 100 kilometers on foot with nearly 5,000 meters of elevation gain. He will be on sideband and FT8 with support from 2 porters, a logistics team, and a safety monitoring group via Garmin InReach. Brandon will be active as Zulu Papa 8 Lima Zulu from 6 summits in Lesotho, only 3 of which have ever been activated previously. Per 425 DX News, 30 special call signs will be on the air September 1st to 28th to mark 85 years since the Battle of Britain. In particular, it is named Polish Wings in the Battle of Britain, highlighting the role of the Polish Air Force squadrons that flew alongside the United Kingdom's Royal Air Force. This event is being organized by UK-based Polish clubs M0SQC and M0KKN and the Polish Amateur Radio Union PZK. More information of this is on their website, and certificates and EQSLs are available as well. The current T-30 Tango 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 operation is QRV from Western Kiribati by the Rebel DX group. They are in their last 13 days. They will be emphasizing 40 and 30 meter CW and sideband soon. They have been incredibly active, incredibly successful, and I can't wait to see their QSO count because they've done a whale of a job. Torsten, DL4APJ, and Udo, DL2AQI, will be operating in the Alan Islands holiday style from September 15th to the 26th. Their call signs were not yet mentioned. They will be on RIDI, PSK, FT4, FT8, CW, and sideband on 80 through 10 meters, as well as 144, 430, and 1200 megahertz. And you can QSL via DL4 APJ via the Bureau, Direct, EQSL, LOTW, Club Log, QRZ, or HRD Log. The 3 Charlie 3 Whiskey team from Equatorial Guinea reports, quote, they are in a hotel in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, close to the ocean, and operating as 3 Charlie 3 Whiskey. They installed a vertical for 3 bands and end-fed half-wave antennas. However, there is not enough space for low-band antennas anywhere nearby. Also, it turns out that there are irregular flights to Annabon, 3 Charlie 0 Whiskey, not only a ferry service, as information initially suggested. The plan is to operate as 3 Charlie 3 Whiskey until Friday, and then to fly to Annabon on Saturday, September 6th. So about the time you're listening to this, you're going to want to see if they're still on the air or if they've moved to Annabon. Fingers crossed that their flights will not get canceled. The DX Mentor will feature a show on propagation on the YouTube channel with propagation experts W3LPL and W3UR, as well as W8GEX. Also, you can still listen to the popular interview with ARRL CEO Dave Minster, NA2AA. If you're interested in DX podcast and YouTube channels, you should check out the DX Mentor Facebook page and subscribe to be kept up to date on all of the DX activities. Until next week, this is Bill saying 7-3, and thanks to my ex-wife Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Welcome to the 42nd segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our gratitude goes out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for permitting us to use his website in the presentation of these segments. Now, follow along with us as we bring you this next chapter of Ham Radio History. New circuits. Though radio had changed rapidly and radically over the past decade, that change only accelerated in the early 20s. New regulations, the broadcast boom, the abandonment of Spark for CW, and new transmitter, receiver, and antenna designs were all happening simultaneously. No single one drove the others, but altogether they advanced the radio art in a self-supporting feedback loop. Since publication of John Reinhardt's 1QP or 1QP tuner in 1921, hundreds of hams had used it on CW with good results, judging by the mail received at the league since then. Prompted by its popularity, in 1922, Reinhardt's further simplified its construction and operation. This new version eliminated the moving inductors completely, combining all into a single, tightly coupled set of inductors on one form with switch taps for antenna tuning and regeneration feedback. The circuit could be tuned from about 130 up to 370 meters, thus taking in the concerts nicely, he pointed out, in addition to being a good, stable CW receiver. And it was extensible. You could add more inductance via external binding posts to extend the tuning range to longer wavelengths. Add an audio amplifier stage and you'd have a complete receiver with the headphones connected directly in the plate circuit. Rumors of a new receiver design by Edwin Armstrong also surfaced around this time. The regenerative detector, which he invented while in college, was now at the heart of most receivers, including Reinhardt's, due to its simple and economical design. Furthermore, it was the principal circuit to finally make widespread practical use of the vacuum tube so many years after its original invention. For a more thorough treatment of regenerative receiving circuits, see Terman F.E. Radio Engineering, 2nd edition, McGraw-Hill, New York, 1937, on page 453. Speaking before an IRE audience on 7 June 1922, Armstrong presented his new design, the Super Regenerative Receiver, which built upon his simple earlier idea. It promised to produce signals far stronger than its predecessor. It could do with only 2 tubes what a super heterodyne receiver did with 10. On 28 June, he demonstrated his prototype to the RCA in front of an audience that overflowed the lecture hall at Columbia, due mostly to the intense interest among broadcast listeners. ARRL Secretary Kenneth Warner attended the lecture and summarized it for QST. The August cover featured a photograph of it. Armstrong's basic idea was clever and simple, yet non-obvious, the essence of invention. The sensitivity of a regenerative receiver was limited by how close to the oscillation point you could adjust it. The closer you got, the stronger the input signal would be amplified. But operating on the edge of criticality sacrificed stability. Adjusting a regen receiver ever closer to the oscillation point was an exercise in frustration. Once the circuit flopped into oscillation, it would stay there. Creeping up to the edge, you'd be lured in by ever-increasing sensitivity, only to fall off the cliff if you went a bit too far. Of course, an oscillating regenerative receiver was useful too. In fact, it made receiving unmodulated CW possible. But the highest sensitivity existed tantalizingly, unreachably, just before that invisible cliff. Armstrong discovered that even when a regenerative detector was adjusted into oscillation, it took a short but finite time for the tube to actually begin oscillating. He found that if you could yank it back into the non-oscillating state quickly enough, you could get a short burst of high amplification without oscillations. If you did this over and over very rapidly, you could have your cake, high sensitivity, and eat it too, avoid oscillation. Using a term borrowed from the Spark days, this yanking back was called quenching the circuit. Armstrong's innovation was to do this automatically using another oscillator, which would repeatedly push the regenerative circuit into and out of oscillation, faster than any human could do it, at a rate called the variation frequency. The variation frequency must be higher than normal audio frequencies, referred to as super audible for phone, modulated CW, and spark, modes for which reproducing the original modulation is important. To get an additional increase in signal strength, the variation frequency could be an audio frequency if the operator did not mind changing the characteristic sound of the incoming signal into a peculiar, hard twang, as Warner described it. For CW, a super audible frequency could be used if combined with a separate beat frequency oscillator to produce an audible tone. Or an audio frequency could be used which would result in all CW signals having the same tone, not good under crowded conditions. On the evening of his lecture, Armstrong's audience of broadcast listeners was primarily interested in receiving phone transmissions, so he concentrated his presentation on the circuit most useful for that mode, one in which detection occurs in the regenerative amplifier and a super audible variation frequency is used, followed by one stage of audio amplification. This was the receiver pictured on the cover of QST. He demonstrated it for the crowd at Columbia by receiving music from WJZ on an indoor loop antenna with enough signal to drive a loudspeaker. Since many of the audience were unfamiliar with loudspeakers, he hooked up a pair of headphones to better impress them with the magnitude of the signal. When he did so, it almost tore up the phones. They clicked and rattled, and the diaphragms hammered on the magnets so hard that it sounded like a Western unit sounder instead of a lady doing her best to sing, complained Warner. Armstrong then demonstrated a version of the circuit for the amateurs, in which a signal regenerator tube also produced its own variation signal. Since either an audible or super audible variation frequency could be selected, was useful with all modes. If used with a super audible variation frequency, the detector stage became unnecessary, reducing the entire circuit to a single tube, one as capable as a 6-tube superheterodyne receiver, according to Armstrong. Operation was simple. Once the receiver was suitably adjusted, with only a small subset of its controls necessary to change the frequency of operation. He proceeded to demonstrate the trade-off between signal strength and audio quality by switching between the two modes using the same circuit, again badly abusing a set of headphones to bring across the magnitude of the signal. Armstrong recommended against using this receiver with an aerial, meaning an outdoor antenna, since the extra input signal was unnecessary. For one thing, signals built up towards infinity, limited only by the tube capability. More importantly, though, when not adjusted properly, the receiver would radiate back through the aerial and cause interference. Particularly impressive was the fact that the super regenerative receiver worked better at shorter wavelengths than long, just the opposite of other designs. Doing her part to advance the art, M. Adair Garmhausen, 3 BCK, made another appearance in QST as author of The Perfect Aerial. She warned readers at the outset that this is a very technical article. It is so technical that anyone with less than 3 degrees shouldn't even read the title. Having spent an entire 2 weeks of spare time research, she now asserted her authority to write about optimizing the aerial. Selectivity was all about being exceedingly selective when purchasing wire, she advised, subjecting it to various tests. Insulators must be tuned ones, bottlenecks being particularly desirable, but only those in which the bottle had contained the real stuff. The shape mattered little, so one might as well be artistic about it. The ground system should be regenerative unless it was properly heterodyned. A lake or other body of water would do nicely, and if it seems hard to solder to a lake, she explained, this is a technical article, and you cannot expect to understand everything you read in a technical article. Connecting to the receiver is very important. Specifically, it is an accepted fact that if the positive side of the aerial be connected to the binding post marked ground, interference will be greatly reduced. The positive side of an aerial is the side you are positive is the negative. Armstrong may not have been aware of Garmhausen's perfected aerial when he spoke against using them with his new receiver. Included in this material are quotes from the following: the improved Reinhardt's tuner, QST, March 1922, page 8. Kenneth B. Warner, Super Regeneration, QST, July 1922, page 7. Kenneth B. Warner and Boyd Phelps, More on Super Regeneration, QST, August 1922, page 7. Marion A. Garmhausen, The Perfect Aerial, QST, May 1923, page 23. With thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, as we prepared this segment, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Over the past 9 months or so, I've been working on a project that I've called Bold Yak. If you're unfamiliar, the Bold Yak project aims to create a modular, bidirectional and distributed signal processing and control system that leverages GNU radio. One of the admittedly many challenges I've set myself is getting data from a radio receiver into GNU radio across the network, preferably the Internet. Today I can report a small step in the right direction, and frankly I can't contain my excitement. Now, I need to acknowledge that I'm geeking out here. It's hard to contain excitement when you find something that seems to speak your language. It also means that I realize that I run the very real risk that I'm going to lose you before you get to why this is a milestone. So let's put that up front before I explain why. To whet your appetite, yes, you can access a Kiwi SDR across the Internet and record raw data from it, and control the process externally. This is a very big chunk of the problem I've been working on, and turns out to actually be live and ready to play with. Fair warning, this is technical. There are moving parts. I'll do my best to explain, but if I miss any, feel free to get in touch. You have my address, cq@vk6flab.com. In passing, recently I made mention of the Kiwi SDR community and tools that could potentially allow access to a remote receiver. Although at the time I pointed out that I wasn't sure if the tools I found could access remote receivers or if they were intended to access hardware locally. Kiwi SDR is one of a group of so-called web SDR tools, essentially a website where you can access a remote receiver and tune to the radio signals it can hear. SDR, or software-defined radio, is a way to convert incoming antenna signals into the digital realm, where computers, and in this case the Internet, live. Turns out that a tool called Kiwi Client takes a hostname and a port as a parameter, so much so that the inbuilt help shows this as the first example. What this means is that you can essentially run a copy of Kiwi Client on your own computer and use it to access a Kiwi SDR across the Internet. The first commit was on the 8th of May 2017, and thanks to the efforts of about 14 developers, Kiwi Client is the software equivalent of a Kiwi SDR multi-tool. This is exciting all by itself, but this gets better. You can specify more than one server. This means that you can record 2 or more signals from across the globe and capture these simultaneously. You can set the decode mode, which I immediately used to tune to a local broadcast station, and recorded it from 2 different receivers across the Internet, allowing me to not only compare the difference in delay between the signals, but also the reception differences. It's fascinating to hear the same station from 2 receivers, one in each ear. All manner of different propagation artifacts become apparent. Then I got a little more adventurous and discovered that one of the supported modes is IQ, which means that I can, and did, download raw sample data across the network, which can then be used within GNU radio. This is important because the aim for Bold Yak is to process the signal separately from the receiver. It gets better. there is a radio fax receiver that automatically saves pages as they are processed, something that you could use to access weather fax services. Then there's a tool you can link to WSJTX, which you might recall is an application that can decode weak signals. Not only that, the tool supports FLDigi, a digital radio mode application. Both those applications can control the radio using ham lib rig control, which means that Kiwi Client supports changing frequencies of the receiver across the internet. Though truth be told, I haven't yet tested that. My available computing resources are still strictly limited. Oh, the software also has the ability to record waterfalls, do scanning, and provides tools to analyze waterfalls in Jupyter notebooks. Getting this to work wasn't too hard. The instructions on the Kiwi Client GitHub repository are pretty good. I made an initial Docker file on my own GitHub repository to download and install the software. It's unimaginatively called Kiwi Client on Docker. I've yet to discover a good way to add or update Docker file functionality to existing projects. Feel free to make suggestions. Now, I absolutely understand that this level of excitement might not universally translate. And that's fine. It's yet another example of how rich and diverse our amateur radio community really is. What gets your excitement levels going? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima Alpha Bravo.
The Federal Communications Commission this week issued a public notice to facilitate the transition of local broadcasters to ATSC 3.0, the next generation television standard designed to enhance viewer experiences with improved picture quality, immersive audio, and interactive features. The Media Bureau's notice outlines regulatory support and clarifies processing practices for ATSC 3.0 license applications, aiming to streamline the shift from the current ATSC 1.0 standard while ensuring minimal disruption to viewers. With this move, the FCC has created a path for local ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC stations to shut down their current free over-the-air TV signals and switch to the new ATSC 3.0 standard. This will force millions of Americans to buy a new ATSC 3.0 converter to continue receiving television off the air. Although there is no deadline for when this transition must be finished by, local TV stations will be able to request permission to fully shift to ATSC 3.0 if they meet certain requirements. The FCC's announcement focuses on three key areas: clarifying methods for determining eligibility for expedited processing, reaffirming the commitment to process non-expedited applications, and highlighting existing flexibilities in the rules for transitioning stations. These steps are intended to encourage broadcasters to adopt ATSC 3.0, which promises advancements like 4K resolution, mobile viewing capabilities, and enhanced emergency alerts. For expedited processing, the FCC requires transitioning full power and Class A stations to simulcast their primary video programming stream in ATSC 1.0, ensuring that at least 95% of the population within a station's noise-limited service contour retains access to the signal. The Bureau clarified that it will continue to use Longley-Rice terrain analysis to calculate population coverage, a method that accounts for geographical factors to assess signal reach accurately. This approach ensures a precise evaluation of whether an application qualifies for expedited processing, typically completed within 15 business days of public notice. For stations unable to meet the 95% coverage threshold, the FCC reaffirmed its commitment to processing non-expedited applications on a case-by-case basis. These applications are evaluated based on their merits, with the Bureau considering factors that minimize viewer impact. For instance, the FCC may offset predicted population losses if another station within the same network affiliation serves the affected audience. Applicants are encouraged to provide detailed data such as contour overlap maps to demonstrate minimal disruption and public interest benefits. The Bureau also invites broadcasters to consult with its video division staff for guidance on navigating these requirements. The notice also emphasizes existing flexibilities in the rules to support the transition. Notably, ATSC 3.0 stations are only required to simulcast their primary stream in ATSC 1.0, not multicast streams, allowing broadcasters to allocate resources efficiently while adopting the new standard. This flexibility aims to balance innovation with viewer accessibility. The FCC's efforts reflect a commitment to modernizing broadcast television while maintaining service continuity. By providing clear guidelines and encouraging coordination, the agency seeks to accelerate the adoption of ATSC 3.0, ensuring broadcasters and viewers alike can benefit from its advanced capabilities.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. Between the time I was preparing the news last week and when it went live, MO122 presented with an issue. The transponder stopped functioning. Ground control stations are working on resolving the issue. It appears that all telemetry is fine and the satellite is healthy. It is quite a quandary. Hopefully the transponder will resume working again. If you're planning on attending the AMSAT Symposium this year, just a quick reminder that the cost to attend will go up on September 16th. Whether you are attending the symposium or not, I will be there to check ARRL, DXCC, VUCC, and WAS cards. If you're in the Phoenix area and need cards checked, stop in and see me. Be sure to have all your paperwork prepared and cards sorted per the ARRL instructions. NASA is looking for assistance in tracking the Artemis II mission. They're looking for hams to give signal reports. If you're interested and to see what is required, visit sam.gov. Click Search. For words to search, enter Doppler measurements. You should get a return for NASA's Artemis II Orion one-way Doppler measurements tracking. Registration opportunity ends October 27th. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's look at the current state of space weather and the weekly propagation forecast. Spaceweather.com for September 5th reports that a total lunar eclipse occurs on September 7th. However, it will not be visible in the Americas. Solar activity will likely continue at moderate levels with isolated M-class flares through September 6th, due to the combined flare potential of regions AR4197 and AR4207. Probabilities decrease to just a chance for M-class flares on September 7th as AR4197 moves beyond the western limb. An enhanced solar wind regime is anticipated to continue into September 6th due to a positive polarity coronal hole high-speed stream. On September 7th, high-speed stream activity, combined with the arrival of the September 4th coronal mass ejection, is likely to cause further minor storming levels with a chance for moderate storms later on. As soon as we begin to think that we are starting to understand what is happening on the Sun, and in its vicinity where we and Earth are located, Mother Nature shows us that it is not that simple. A small example is, while we were observing the extensive active region 4197 on the Sun, an eruption occurred in another, much smaller and less conspicuous region, AR4199, which had a key influence on the events of the following days. It happened on the evening of Saturday, August 30th, very close to the solar equator and the central meridian, so it was directed towards Earth. The forecasts of further developments from all forecasting centers were identical. The coronal mass ejection would arrive at Earth on September 1st in the late afternoon to evening hours and cause a G2 class magnetic storm, accompanied by auroras. And so it happened. As predicted, the geomagnetic disturbance continued on September 2nd. This was followed by a relatively rapid calm, and by September 4th, the state of the Earth's magnetosphere and ionosphere began to approach what we are used to at the end of summer and beginning of autumn. In other words, there was a noticeable improvement in the conditions for ionospheric shortwave propagation. In further developments, the Earth will be affected by another surge of solar wind on September 6th. But this should come as no surprise, as it is a regularly recurring passage of the Earth through a stream of intensified solar wind linked to active areas on the Sun. The entire system, together with the Sun, rotates once every approximately 27 days. Therefore, predictions of the onset of disturbances are relatively reliable. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Luetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the VOCAP online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week on September 6th, the CW Ops CW Open, that of course is CW. September 6th and 7th, the SARL Field Day Contest, CW Phone and Digital. The IARU Region 1 Field Day, that's single sideband phone. And also on the 6th and 7th, it's the RSGB Single Sideband Field Day, that is phone. September 7th and 8th, the Tennessee QSO Party, CW Phone and Digital. September 10th, the RSGB 80-meter Autumn Series, CW. And September 13th and 14th, it's the ARRL EME Contest, CW Phone and Digital. Remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming Section State and Division Conventions on September 7th, the Southern New Jersey Conference and HAMFest hosting the ARRL New Jersey Section Convention. That's in Mulligan Hill, New Jersey. September 12th and 13th, the Slidell EOC HAMFest hosting the ARRL Louisiana State Convention. That's in Slidell, Louisiana. September 19th to the 21st, it's the Duke City HAMFest hosting the ARRL New Mexico State Convention in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And September 20th through the 21st, the Midwest Superfest hosting the ARRL Central Division Convention. That's in Chillicothe, Illinois. And remember to search the ARRL HAMFest and Convention database to find more events in your area. Hurricane WatchNet HWN manager Bobby Graves, KB5HAV, reports that HWN is entering the world of podcasting. The first episode of the HWN Report podcast began at noon Eastern Time, September 4th, 2025, on YouTube. Episode 1 featured information about the birth of the HWN and its founder, Jerry Murphy, K8YUW. The HWN is currently celebrating its 60th anniversary, serving the National Hurricane Center and mankind since 1965.
Cambridge Tetrahertz received FCC Spectrum Horizons license W2PXPV for imagers used in detection of concealed weapons. Spectrum Horizons licenses are for, in the FCC's words, experiments leading to innovative devices and or services on frequencies above 95 GHz. The Cambridge license is for nationwide mobile operations in the 275 through 330 MHz band at 609 watts effective radiated power. Unlike other devices and services subject to FCC authority, Rule 47 CFR 5.704 Subpart A permits marketing of devices and provisions of services for hire before the radio frequency device has been authorized by the Commission. We're among the few companies worldwide with an FCC license for terahertz devices, including rigorous human safety analysis, according to founder Nathan Monroe. The imager can see through any non-conductive material. These imagers, once deployed, would enable a wide variety of applications, including concealed weapons detection, non-destructive testing, and medical imaging, and bring the terahertz technology from research labs to practical uses, the company told the FCC. Our initial focus will be on concealed weapons detection. Screening individuals for weapons has become a fundamental public safety imperative and critical to addressing risk of weapons violence in law enforcement, as well as in settings such as schools, hospitals, airports, government facilities, businesses, and event venues. Among its funders, the company received a National Science Foundation grant which stated the global market for advanced security screening solutions is projected to exceed $10 billion by 2025, and the addressable segment for this terahertz imaging technology estimated at $2 to $3 billion annually beyond security applications. The core technology has broader impacts across a diverse set of industries, potentially unlocking a multi-billion-dollar marketing opportunity.
The ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology is getting a boost, courtesy of the ham radio community on YouTube. A group of content creators gathered for a cookout at this year's Huntsville Hamfest and raised $6,425 for the program. We have a tremendous amount of support from the YouTubers, said ARRL Education and Learning Manager Steve Goodgame, K5ATA. They're on track to raise and donate $50,000 for the Teachers Institute this year. The support flows through the ARRL Education and Technology Fund, which makes the program possible.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
AST Space Mobile's attempt to justify its use of the amateur radio 70 centimeter band for its satellites has done little to assuage concerns from the ham radio community. AST is again economical with the truth. An amateur radio operator in Germany named Mario Lorenz wrote to the FCC last week. During the last few weeks, Texas-based AST defended using the radio band, telling the FCC that any radio interference should be minimal. It would use the 430 to 440 MHz band for very limited, non-routine use, such as emergency operations when other frequency bands are unavailable. However, the amateur radio community says that AST is already using those bands. This week, AMSAT Deutschland sent a letter to the FCC that says amateur radio users have detected signals from AST's satellites over the radio bands. The claim is therefore either misrepresentation or deliberate falsehood, AMSAT Deutschland wrote. In particular, AST's Blue Walker 3 satellite was spotted using the radio band up until July 23rd, as the amateur radio community began campaigning against the spectrum use. Ironically, AMSAT Deutschland operates as a group devoted to the advancement of satellite communications, along with amateur radio satellites. In the letter, the group even noted, "We applauded AST Space Mobile's ambitious goals. However, innovation must not come at the expense of internationally recognized and community-supported amateur radio services." AMSAT Deutschland also went on to say that the clash with AST has hit a nerve with the amateur radio community over concerns it could set a precedent if the FCC greenlights the company's use of the 430 to 440 MHz bands for satellite control. In addition, the group is worried that the FCC is effectively shifting the resulting interference risk to other countries. If similar authorizations are granted to other commercial operators, the 430 to 440 MHz band could gradually become unusable for amateur radio. What is framed as exceptional use today risks becoming the norm tomorrow, to the detriment of a long-standing and diverse community of amateur radio users, the group said. It also raises questions about AST's technical maturity, the group added. Other large-scale satellite operators, such as SpaceX, with over 6,000 Starlink satellites in orbit, appear to manage telemetry, tracking, and command functions without resorting to use of the amateur UHF band. AST didn't immediately respond to a request for comment, but the company submitted a third-party analysis to the FCC that claims to show the risk of interference to be extremely unlikely to amateur radio operations. However, Mario Lorenz, the amateur radio user who helped kick off the protest campaign, told the FCC this week that the third-party analysis was flawed. Yet again, AST tries to get away with handing in only half the homework it was supposed to do, Lorenz wrote. Despite its title, the study addresses only a single scenario of interference in the amateur radio satellite service, not amateur radio use on the ground. The Bulgarian Federation of Amateur Operators also told the FCC last month, even slight interference under these operating conditions can result in harmful interference as defined in FCC Regulations 47 CFR 2.1, disrupting communications, damaging experimental data integrity, and jeopardizing control of amateur satellites.
Ionoterra U.S. Survey LLC has received FCC extension of its earthquake prediction experiments at station WP2XSR. It operates from 4 California locations in 10 shortwave bands from 2 through 30 megahertz. Under separate call sign WZ9XTC, the company awaits authorization for additional transmission sites. The friction between tectonic plates, which causes earthquakes, releases a lot of plasma. Ionoterra CEO Doron Angelovich said, "The ionosphere is like a boiling soup, but if you know what you're looking for, it's possible to see the effects of this plasma on the ionosphere and use it to predict earthquakes up to 8 hours in advance." The Ionoterra ionosonde transmits at 15-minute intervals. By keeping its signals low in power, short in duration, and infrequent in repetition, the company said, we will remain practically invisible to other HF users and thus will not cause harmful interference to any of those users. Ionoterra supplied a letter from UCLA Technology Development Group noting that UCLA has a contract for validating Ionoterra's earthquake predictions. Meanwhile, Pharmasaur Lab was issued WO2XTX for experiments at 411 through 475, 5,725 through 5,850, and 2,400 through 2,500 megahertz in Nashua, New Hampshire. Our current prototype is a spread spectrum OFDM modulated mobile wireless mesh network using the industrial, scientific, and medical bands, abiding by the ISM band rules, the company said. We've leveraged our numerous novel and patented wireless synchronization innovations to implement a mobile mesh network with nodes synchronized at sub-nanosecond levels. This high-quality sync has created numerous high-value applications for both commercial and military purposes, including GPS backup, GPS-free drone guidance, and 5G position tracking, to name a few. We are developing a narrowband long-range prototype for tactical radio, land mobile radio, and integrated sensing and communications applications.
With a special event call sign Whiskey 2 Romeo from September 1st through September 29th, John, Whiskey 2 Delta, will be on the air celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal is a historic waterway in New York State, connecting the Atlantic Ocean via the Hudson River to the Great Lakes at Lake Erie. Completed in 1825, it was North America's first navigable waterway linking the two systems, and the greatest public works project of its time. The canal was an immense commercial success, dramatically reducing transportation costs and fostering the growth of cities like Buffalo and Rochester, and playing a vital role in New York's rise as the Empire State. Today, the original canal is part of the New York State Barge Canal, and is primarily used for recreational, boating, and as part of the multi-use Empire State Trail. The Erie Canal was built between 1817 and 1825. The original canal was 363 miles long, stretching from Albany to Buffalo. It was a massive undertaking featuring locks that raised boats significant heights. The canal was an instant commercial and financial success, with tolls completely repaying the construction loan within 9 years. It significantly lowered the cost of moving goods and people, creating new markets and routes for settlers. The Erie Canal helped make New York City the nation's premier seaport and spurred the development of towns along its route. In the early 20th century, the canal was overhauled to create the New York State Barge Canal, allowing larger steamships to pass through. Today, the New York State Canal System, including the Erie Canal, is now a major route for recreational boating. Numerous museums, canal sites, and historical remnants along the route showcase the canal's legacy of engineering. Many portions of the former Canal towpath have been converted into a multi-use trail for walking and cycling, forming part of the Empire State Trail. John Whiskey 2 Juliet Lima Delta will be transmitting at various sites throughout downtown Rochester, New York. Cobbs Hill Park was part of the Western Waterway system that allowed boats to turn around in the large body of water. The Erie Canal ran through part of his neighborhood, known as Lock Number 66. There is a large portion of it which is visible from the expressway here in Rochester, New York. You can help John celebrate the 200th anniversary of the Erie Canal by working him on the air. There will be a special event QSL card available upon request. This is an HF-only event. Look for him on 20 meters and 40 meters. He will list what frequencies he will be on the ROC-HAM.net website. To obtain your special event QSL card, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to Whiskey 2 Juliet Lima Delta. You can find his address on QRZ.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Team USA brought home both individual and team medals from the 22nd World Championships of Amateur Radio Direction Finding, or ARDF, held August 16th through the 22nd, 2025, in Bostonas, Lithuania. ARDF, also known as radio orienteering, combines radio direction finding with on-foot map and compass navigation. Using a handheld receiver with a directional antenna, a map, and a compass, competitors search for foxes or hidden transmitters in forest terrain, racing to locate them in the shortest time. The USA delegation numbered 19 competitors who represented the country across multiple age categories. Overall, the championships featured over 300 athletes from 25 nations, a strong showing on the international ARDF stage. The highlight for Team USA came in the classic 80-meter event, in which Nadja Charlo, Kilo Oscar 4, Alpha Delta Victor of North Carolina, was awarded an individual silver medal in the W55, or women ages 55 to 64 category. Her strong performance also anchored the USA W55 team, which earned the team a bronze medal. The W55 team was rounded out by Maria Burris and Ala Metsavaya, who also received team medals. At the World Championships, team scoring is based on the two best individual results from a nation's competitors in each age category. Teams may include 2 to 3 athletes. Several U.S. athletes competed at a World Championship for the first time, including Maria Burris in W45, Rose Ganem, Whiskey 1, Romeo Bravo Golf in W45, Andrew Mayer in M21, Matt Craig, Kilo Mike 8, Whiskey Bravo Charlie in M50, and Roland Woodward, Kilo Charlie 9, Yankee Quebec Tango, also in M50. Except for Burris and Craig, each was introduced to the sport at the 2024 USA Championships in Michigan, demonstrating rapid progression from novices to international competitors in under a year. Other notable U.S. competitors included Aaron Hammer in the W35 category, Natalia Leone in W45, Ruth Brommer, Whiskey Bravo 4, Quebec Zulu Golf in W65, Georgia Fala in M21, Edward Nazibolin in M40, Alexander Mayachin in M50, Evany Daniloff, Kilo Quebec 4, Quebec Yankee Zulu in M60, William Wright, Whiskey Bravo 6, Charlie Mike Delta, also in M60, Nikolai Medjevoy in M60, Ian Shields in M70, and Joseph Hoverman, Kilo 5, Juliet Gulf Hotel, also in the M70 category. For full results of the 22nd ARDF World Championships, see ardf.darc.de. For more information on ARDF and how to get involved, visit the ARRL Radio Orienteering webpage. We thank Charles E. Charlo, November Zulu 0 India, USA ARDF co-coordinator for this story.
It is time for AMSAT's Satellite Shorts from all over. This week, we start with news that the United States is racing to be the first nation to deploy a nuclear reactor on the lunar surface, following the new orders from acting NASA Administrator Sean Duffy. His directive, dated July 31st, calls for fast-tracking lunar nuclear power to stay ahead of China and Russia, who have announced joint plans to build a reactor by the mid-2030s. Duffy warned that if rivals succeed first, they could impose keep-out zones that would threaten United States access and undermine the Artemis program, which aims to return astronauts to the moon in 2027. The order requires NASA to appoint a program leader within 30 days and expand on previous work with the Department of Energy to develop fission surface power producing at least 40 kilowatts of power. Since long-term lunar operations are estimated to require at least 100 kilowatts of electrical power, or about the consumption of 80 to 100 United States homes. Nuclear power is seen as critical for sustaining life on the moon and enabling future Mars missions. In addition, Duffy issued a separate directive to speed up commercial space station deployment as the International Space Station nears retirement by 2030. And finally this week, SpaceX has partnered with American radio astronomers to develop an automated system that reduces satellite interference with sensitive radio telescopes. The collaboration, led by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, created the operational data sharing system and a Starlink algorithm that redirects satellite beams or mutes electronics during scheduled observations. This system, tested at a very large array in New Mexico, allows telescopes to continue detecting faint cosmic signals despite thousands of satellites crossing overhead daily. Radio astronomers warn that interference from low Earth orbit constellations like Starlink could obscure signals from distant galaxies, or even evidence of extraterrestrial life. With satellite numbers expected to rise above 100,000 by 2030, the need for protective measures is urgent. Researchers hope the system will be adopted worldwide and by other satellite operators, enabling astronomy and satellite internet coexistence. If successful, this approach could set a precedent for balancing technological progress with preservation of humanity's window into the universe.
With the retirement of NOAA 15, NOAA 18, and NOAA 19 satellites, the long-running Polar Orbiting Operational Environmental Satellite Series has officially ended service. Some in the community worry this marks the end of easily accessible weather imagery, but the outlook for amateur reception remains bright. Russia's Meteor M satellites are now the mainstay for 137 megahertz reception. Their LRPT signals are strong and reliable, and with additional Meteor M launches planned, service is expected to continue well into the 2040s. Higher resolution imagery is also available on the 1.7 GigaHertz band for those with modest upgrades in equipment. Europe's METOP series continues to transmit on L-band with METOP B and C, expected to operate until 2027 and 2030. The newly launched METOP SG satellite will extend coverage for another decade, ensuring continuity for hobbyists. In addition, the Arctic Weather Satellite and its planned successor in the Sturnus series will provide valuable radiometric data for weather monitoring. Geostationary satellites also provide opportunities. Russia's Electro-L constellation broadcasts HRIT-LRIT on 1691 MHz with a new spacecraft scheduled for launch this October. For those in the Americas, the GOES series will remain active through the 2030s, continuing HRIT and GRB service. The U.S. Space Force's EWS-G program further adds to the options, retasking former GO satellites for continued imagery. China's Fengyun 3 satellite and Korea's GK2A also contribute, while future developments in X-band reception are lowering the barrier for amateurs interested in higher resolution Earth observations. Advances in software such as SatDump are making it easier than ever to decode and process these signals on affordable hardware. The decommissioning of the Polar Orbiting Operational Environmental Satellite Fleet marks the end of an era, but not the end of the hobby. With a diverse mix of active and planned satellites across multiple bands, amateur weather satellite reception will remain an active part of the hobby, supported by a mix of current satellites and future missions. For those interested in exploring these opportunities, the open-source SatDump software can be used to decode imagery from many of the satellites mentioned above. SatDump is available for download at satdump.org.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
Special Event Station K6C will operate at the California State Capitol Park on Tuesday, September 9th, 2025, in celebration of the 175th anniversary of California statehood. All are welcome to visit and participate at the amateur radio station in the Capitol Park Cactus Garden at 15th and North Street in Sacramento, and to contact the station on air. There is also a call now for volunteer operators. Please email Bob at n6pgq@arrl.net if you are interested in joining the volunteer operator team. K6C will operate various modes, including the target phone frequencies of 7.290, 14.290, and 28.390 MHz from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific Time, or 1400 through 0400 UTC. Contacts count towards Parks on the Air credit. For a special edition QSL card, you can go to specialevent.arrlsacvalley.org for instructions on how to request your downloadable QSL, confirming successful contacts with this special event station.
The Japan Amateur Satellite Association, or JAMSAT, has announced progress in its development of an open-source multi-mode linear transponder for amateur radio on CubeSats. The project is called Blueberry Jam. The international team working on the project believes it will have a model available by the middle of 2026 and hopes to make it available to satellite developers and universities where CubeSats are being prepared for flight. According to a report by AMSAT News, Blueberry Jam will support linear operation and will have the potential for delay modes, data handling, and other digital capabilities. Because of the project's fully open-source design, the ham radio community can expect to have access to design documents and details about the transponder's development. The ultimate goal is to have up to 10 spacecraft in flight with the transponder on board.
The Swedish Amateur Radio Association will celebrate its 100th anniversary September 10th through October 12th, 2025. There will be 8 special event stations on the air: SB100 SSA, SC100 SSA, SD100 SSA, SE100 SSA, SF100 SSA, SM100 SSA, 7S100 SSA, and 8S100 SSA, using bands from 160 to 10 meters and modes including SSB, CW, and digital, including FT8, FT4, PSK, and RTTY. Each special event station may be worked only once per day on the same band and mode. Contacts may be repeated on the following day. Each contact with a special event station earns 1 point for European stations and 3 points for DX stations outside of Europe. All anniversary stations will use real-time logging at hamaward.cloud. There will be several awards, including Points Award, minimum of 100 points, All Award, QSOs with all 8 special event stations on all 3 modes for a total of 24, and plaques for highest point score in each continent with a minimum of 100 points. All awards and EQSL cards can be retrieved electronically from hamaward.cloud. The Swedish Amateur Radio Association was founded on September 10, 1925. SSA invites all radio amateur operators around the world to participate in its Centennial Award activity.
The United States mobile broadband provider that hopes to use amateur radio frequencies to support its planned satellite-based network has rolled back the date for the launch of its prototype satellite. This is the second delay by AST Space Mobile, which had originally hoped to launch the satellite known as FM1 in August and first postponed it to October or November. India's space agency, ISRO, confirmed the delay in a press conference with local Indian media, adding that FM1 would likely not launch until the first quarter of 2026. FM1, which has a phased array antenna, is designed to function as a cell tower from space. The announcement comes barely a week after the company said it expects to launch between 45 and 60 satellites by next year. No reason was given for the postponement, which was reported on the PC Magazine website. AST Space Mobile is building its network in partnership with Verizon and AT&T, and is considered a rival to Starlink services, which are partnered with T-Mobile. Texas-based AST Space Mobile has asked the FCC to authorize its network's use of amateur radio frequencies between 430 and 440 MHz, a request that has drawn challenges from the amateur radio community. In July, the FCC assigned FM1 the call sign WP2XRX, which expires on July 1, 2027. Its license authorizes experimental operation for mobile satellite services on 37.5 to 42 GHz and 2.235 GHz and 2.245 GHz.
September is National Preparedness Month, which is a good time to look at your personal, family, and community resilience levels. With more details on the National Preparedness Month, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this special report from League headquarters.
2025, the National Preparedness Month theme is Preparedness Starts at Home. Amateur radio is a valuable resource of communication and community service before and during times of crisis, and can be a significant factor in your home's level of preparedness. Now is the time to make sure everything is in order, said ARRL Director of Emergency Management Josh Johnston, KE5MHV. For hams, it means taking the time to check their equipment from the ground to the antenna so that it is ready. Many hams already practiced in daily, weekly, and monthly nets that help them hone their communication skills, but if you're not already active on one, this could be a good opportunity to get into it, said Johnston. To extend your personal preparedness into helping provide community resilience, Johnston invites operators to become active in their local ARRL Amateur Radio Emergency Service, Erie's activities. Erie's has been leveraging the utility value of the amateur radio service for 90 years, he said. We saw that last year during Hurricane Helene, how vital of a lifeline ham radio operators were for the affected areas. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is predicting an above-normal 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. Hurricane Watch Net manager Bobby Graves, KB5HAV, says that should motivate hams but not scare them. Never let your guard down, said Graves. Don't live your life in fear, just be aware. Graves added that his net operators are spread across the Western Hemisphere, but they still have training sessions via radio nets and Zoom meetings.
Balmont Tech, the maker of precision keys popular with CW operators around the world, has announced the sudden death of its owner Marcus Bassler, DL6YYM, and the company's plan to close its doors. No details about his death have been immediately provided, but there is a message posted on the business website saying that it is reviewing existing orders to determine whether they can be fulfilled. Marcus was known as an enthusiastic CW operator, operating QRP and Parks on the Air. He has made plans to operate in Greenland in August, but called off the trip, writing on his QRZ page, "Due to unexpected illness, unfortunately, I've had to cancel everything." The company website includes an earlier message posted by Marcus himself, noting that DHL has temporarily halted its shipments to the United States.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
And we take leave of you this week with a reminder that Straight Key Nights are on the air in Canada. This year it takes just 4 letters, C, S, K, and M. That's Charlie, Sierra, Kilo, Mike, to let everyone on the air know that they're hearing a CW operator in one of Canada's provinces who's taking part in the Canadian Straight Key Month as part of the Straight Keys Century Club. The event has eliminated the use of special call signs. Now hams will be heard calling CQ, CSKM, followed by their own call sign. According to the Straight Key Century Club website, the change was made to make it easier for everyone to enjoy the event, which runs through September 30th. Operators who work at least 6 different provinces are eligible for a special downloadable award. The annual event is similar to the Straight Key Century Club Straight Key Month featuring U.S. stations. That event, which uses the call sign K3Y, takes place every January.
Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the RAIN Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet. This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeaters around the country and around the world, on great repeater systems like WA3PBD repeater system, on Thursday evenings at 7:30 p.m. on 146.730 and 223.940. Covering all of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and beyond.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, That wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.